I, Kofi Annan,
solemnly swear.
solemnly swear.
New Year's Day 1997, Kofi Annan is the first black African to lead the UN.
Congratulations, sir.
He'd worked there for 25 years, born into privilege, an aristocratic Ghanaian lineage, expensive education in Switzerland and the US, and he'd now become the world's most recognized diplomat. He attempted at once to turn the UN around, slimming down a notoriously bloated organization from the brink of bankruptcy. He convinced member states to take it more seriously and take more responsibility for many of the world's problems. At the turn of the century, Kofi Annan turned the UN's attention to the future, establishing the Millennium Development Goals to cut extreme poverty and stop the spread of HIV and AIDS.
To come forward to receive the gold medal and the diploma.
In 2003, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his humanitarian work. The same year, though, the US, UK and others went to war in Iraq. The UN refused to support the move, and the ensuing violence caused a rift between Mr. Annan and the UK, once one of its closest allies. Kofi Annan was often unflinching about the UN's failings and his own. A decade after the genocide in Rwanda, in which 800,000 people died, he acknowledged very publicly that he could have done more to stop it. Perhaps a more painful scandal closer to home involved his son Kojo. In 2004, he was implicated in a scandal over Iraq's sanctions. The investigation criticised Kofi Annan for not exerting enough control. He was damaged by it, but accepted the criticisms made in the report. But Kofi Annan was, above all, a man of quiet demeanour, but lifelong optimism.
It's never been done. Don't try. You are dreaming. And my answer always was test it.
As he told the New York Times, people of my generation, having seen the changes that took place in Ghana, grew up thinking all was possible.
Well, earlier I spoke to the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who is now the UN Special Envoy for Global Education. And I asked him about what sort of a man Kofi Annan really was.
Huge strength of purpose. He was soft-spoken, he was personally very modest, a really humble man, quite self-effacing, but he was a titan. He was a leader of leaders. He was compassionate, of course, he was a great humanitarian, and he was determined. He put the United Nations in a completely different light during his period in office. He brought it into the 21st century, he modernized it. Instead of the smoke-filled rooms, he was taking it out into the world, putting poverty on the agenda, inequality, injustice, climate change, as well as the pursuit of peace. And I think the world is a sadder place for his loss, and it was a greater place because of his achievement.
Did you, I wonder if you've an anecdote, did you ever see, as it were, with your own eyes, something close up, an instance of that kind of sheer effectiveness that you've just outlined there?
I had the privilege of working with him on numerous occasions, and his patience, his willingness to spend time listening, his ability to take into account all different points of view was absolutely important, but it did not detract from his fundamental aim. He wanted to make the world a more peaceful place, and he wanted to make it a fairer place.
Whether he made it a more peaceful place or a better place, obviously, will be a long discussion. Donald Trump would say the UN is no more relevant than it ever was. Is that a comment or an illustration of Donald Trump, or an illustration that, in fact, Kofi Annan wasn't quite as effective as people say today?
I think it's unfair to Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General, the previous one, Ban Ki-moon, and to Kofi Annan. Look, there are 40 conflicts or so around the world. There are 30 million displaced people. There are 20 million or so refugees, 30 million other displaced children. And the United Nations is trying to work to bring communities that are in dispute together, try and resolve wars that are happening. And of course, it can only do as much as the resources it has and the power that is given to it by the governments of the day. And I think Kofi Annan showed that the United Nations could make a difference, that the international community was not just an abstraction, it was something that could work if good men and women got together to try to make it work. And I think the evidence is the Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Goals that he himself pushed for the creation of, the climate change talks and the agreement that eventually took place in Paris, he led the way at the beginning on this. And of course, the resolution of many conflicts where people will say today that many, many lives were saved because Kofi Annan was prepared to intervene and take the time and the patience to be able to bring people together.
Of course, the UN and indeed Kofi Annan did not support the US and the UK invasion of Iraq. How big a problem was that?
Look, Kofi Annan was a peacemaker. He was dealing with many conflicts around the world. The Iraq one was the most significant of the early years of the century. And he tried very hard to bring people together. I think he would regard it as a failure, that he tried his best. I think we would now all want to say that the peacemakers should have had a longer chance, a bigger chance to have made a difference. But Kofi Annan never gave up in the search for peace, and he felt it very badly that the Americans in particular wouldn't listen to him at that time.
But Gordon Brown, the war was a disaster, and that's been proven. Kofi Annan was right, the British and the Americans were wrong.
Well, I've written about this at some length. I mean, nobody would agree that Saddam Hussein should have stayed in power. But what people would have agreed is that there should have been more time given to making peace. And I think Kofi Annan was among many of those who urged that more time was given to try to create a peaceful settlement.
That's close to saying he was right in then not supporting the move to invasion.
Yeah, but what he couldn't manage to do was persuade other countries that the United Nations was the proper forum for solving the problem. I think we could go into a lot of depth on this, and I've written about it in some detail. I think it's true to say that the Americans probably knew that weapons of mass destruction did not exist at the time, but of course many people were given the information that that was true, and that's of course where the agreement broke down.
Dear friends and colleagues, saying goodbye is never easy. I have spent most of my life working with the United Nations. I feel it is my home. I can think of no other job in the world that would have been so rewarding. And I have met wonderful people along the way and made many friends around the world. It has been an extraordinary privilege to serve as Secretary General these last 10 years. I believe we can all feel proud of what we have done together in that time to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. Sometimes we have shared the exhilaration of success, such as winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001. At others, we have faced bitter trials, especially the tragic loss of 22 of our friends and colleagues in Baghdad in 2003. Without your support, I could not have achieved what I did or got through some very difficult times. And through it all, you, the staff, have maintained your professionalism and commitment and remained true to the spirit of the Charter and the principle of an independent international civil service. That principle remains central to the UN's mission, and I know you will continue to defend it. We now welcome a new Secretary General who will bring fresh energy and new ideas to the task. I know that he will find in you, as I have, the most talented, dedicated and conscientious staff that anyone could hope for. As we begin the next phase of our lives, Nan and I will still be with you in spirit. I have often said that you can take the man out of the UN, but you can't take the UN out of the man. Thank you once again, my dear friends and colleagues. I will count on you to carry on your indispensable work, and I wish you all success in the years ahead. The world that I'm working to create is a world that should be of interest to all of us. I'm working to create a world that is stable, that is peaceful, where we as human beings realize that we cannot consume the resources of the world the way we are doing, as if there is no tomorrow. It's going to be a disaster for our children and our grandchildren. The farmer knows instinctively that if you take something from the earth today, you have to put something back to be able to return to harvest tomorrow. Somehow, when we move to the city, we lose that instinct. We need to create a world that is equitable, that is stable, and a world where we bear in mind the needs of others and not only what we need immediately. We are all in the same boat. Let's say in a cruise, boat sometimes seems too small. Let's say we are all in a cruise. Some may be in the best suites in the boat, others may be in a little dinghy hole somewhere. But if the ship begins to take water, whatever end of the boat you are, whatever your accommodation, we are all at risk. We should reach out and work in partnership with civil society, with the private sector, with foundations, with philanthropies, focusing on the need of the individual. Yes, states are important and their concerns are important, but at the end of the day, it is the citizens and the individual needs which are important. Huge problems like genocide begins with one individual, the humiliation of one individual. And so the focus on individuals and people is the right one. And if we work in partnership and we all do our little bit collectively, we will make a giant contribution.